Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 8.20, the equal measure. We are back.
Yes. Last time on Aetheral Space, we had John Blair becoming, it wasn't specified, but he basically, something happened with the Red God, and then he ate Peon, one of the other people in the Dead Hand, who was an equipment manager.
Yeah. And
then we saw Marie. Earlier on, it looked like she was kidnapping Muzazi, but then we see her confronting Ranavalona / Asaya, and all his infants gone. All his apes gone. Alright. All the life seemed to drain from Hasaya's body as he turned away from the crimson vat, but the fury in his eyes was undiminished. His body changed as he moved, additional arms sloughing off and being reabsorbed, additional eyes sinking back into his skull. By the time he faced Marie, he was an utterly different man. A gray humanoid with slick and slimy skin, proportions stretched and warped like a child's drawing. This was not a form Titan Hasaya had put composure into. I was just wondering, could you counter the 9x9 gene tyrant weakness by just making your body really big?
Well, yeah, if you have enough biomass.
Yeah, because then it's a hell of a lot harder to do the whole cut you all into 9x9.
Yeah.
Also, how precise is the 9x9? If you're 0.2 inches off, would it not work?
It wouldn't. With 0.2 inches off, though, yeah, it's very specific.
Okay. She did... Why? He asked, his voice deceptively dull. Why have you done this thing? Slowly, carefully, Marie put her sandwich down and stood up. Hasaya's bloodshot eyes followed her as she moved, but he stayed still as ever. If Marie hadn't adjusted her biology, she'd have been sweating buckets. It would take only the slightest stimulus for this to turn into a fight. She did her best to explain. I saw it. Like you said, I calculated the future. What would have happened if you went ahead with all this? Her voice was calm and patient, with only the slightest quiver. All those people, dead, burning, and... People? Hasaya interrupted. He took a sticky step forward, the light of the lab reflecting off his gray skin. What people? Marie kept her eyes fixed on him. I saw Azumha. I saw it falling, the Enfant destroying everything. I could hear the planet screaming, everyone dying. It was... A hollow croaking sound, a long "oh" crawled out of Hasaya's throat as he opened his mouth slightly. It went on for long seconds, his eyes sad as he stared Marie down. Through his open mouth, she could see gills and filters shivering. Black tears trickled down his face. People, he repeated, like the word was the saddest thing in the world. Oh no, they've contaminated you. Titan Hasaya was in the mood for no more conversation. He was upon her in a second, mauling her, his gray skin and smooth features replaced with wiry black fur and the claws and fangs of a wild beast. He bit and gored, gnawed and eviscerated, buckets of Marie's blood and flesh spreading out beneath her. She only realized he'd moved when he tore out her small intestine with his teeth. Immediately she kicked him away with an impromptu hooved foot, and he crashed up into the ceiling, cracks spreading along its surface. Marie's body changed, tendrils sprouting from her back and drawing the expended blood and flesh back, replenishing her biomass. Wait, she can, draw torn off bits of her back in?
Yeah, she scoops
without
it back
eating
up.
them? Oh. So I guess you just need to be touching biomass.
Well, she can change her biology to be something that can just absorb it through skin.
I see. She rose to her feet, her limbs growing thinner and longer. Sorry, this is a terrible time to have that thought. Remind me to have this thought at the end of the episode.
Okay.
Her limbs growing thinner and longer. Her fingers sharpening in the claws. Plates of bone and tooth sprouted over her joints and vital areas. She looked up. In defiance of gravity, Hasaya had not yet fallen back to the floor. Instead, legs like those of a spider had sprouted from his torso, spearing back into the ceiling and holding him in place. The fur covering his face shifted, and a new visage emerged, a facsimile of a human skull, framed by darkness. It was the only trace of color among his jet black fur. Jirai Gumo? Is that you?
Who?
Isn't that the yokai that's like a spider with a skull face?
I don't know.
Hold on, let me look up Google
You don't
Jirai
need to.
Gumo. Sorry, okay. Oh, yep, you're right. In the... It was the only trace color... Okay. It's not your fault, His hollow voice emerged without movement of his new mouth. "You don't understand the way things work. You're incapable of it. Reboot, and I'll teach your successor the way of things." Marie scoffed, flexing her claws. "Fat chance." "It isn't up to you." Hisaya's throat swelled grotesquely, and when his jaws snapped open, he spat out a massive green web that wrapped itself around Marie like a sticky blanket. She couldn't quite see with it covering her face, but she heard well enough, and she heard the sound of Hisaya's stomach legs detaching from the ceiling. He intended to continue his attack while the web rendered her immobile. Trying to tear it off was a waste of time. Marie raised her internal body temperature as much as she could without endangering her life, her skin turning red and visibly blistering. As Hisaya slapped her with a tendril, sending her flying across the room, the webs encasing her burst into flame, falling away before she reached the wall. Marie relaxed her internal structure, and as she struck the wall, she splattered like a piece of chewing gum, features and organs distributed generously in an indiscriminate mass. She pulled herself back together as quickly as she was able, taking on a quadrupedal reptilian form, but Hisaya was wasting no time either. Before she could finish reconstituting herself, she felt his now massive fist slam into her face, rupturing her eyeballs and shattering her skull. With a hiss of effort, Marie converted one of her crawling limbs into a blade of bone and thrust it forwards, running Hisaya's torso right through, but he didn't so much as flinch. His bestial form had changed somewhat, shifted, more great ape than wolf. As he kicked her away once again, shattering the consoles in her path, burning breath sprouted from his nostrils, like twin kettles come to boil. He held one of his huge arms out to the side, and the hand melted and reformed into a mighty axe blade of bone. "I truly do not understand you," he said softly. Behind him, triggered by one of the consoles, one of the vents slid open, red liquid spilling out copiously. Hisaya glanced at it out of the corner of his eye. With a roar, he charged. Marie's left arm became her new head, and the ruins of her former head became a new arm, her entire form shifting to accommodate the new configuration. Her legs fused together into a lengthy, girthy tail, lashing out at Hisaya in an effort to restrain and constrict him. But she'd underestimated his strength. He brought the flat side of the axe down on the midsection of her tail as it approached, cutting it and severing the makeshift nervous system she'd arranged for it. Without an instant of hesitation, his foot stomped down on the wound and began to spread out like the roots of a tree, securing itself against the floor and holding her in place. Hisaya brought down the axe countless times, each time aiming for wherever she'd created a new head, each time hitting his mark in a shower of blood and brains. "You think you've ruined me, ended anything? This is a delay. This, you, are a learning experience." Marie's eyes stretched out like those of a snail, hardened into spiked tendrils, but Hisaya's free arm became a thin sickle and sliced them off without difficulty. "If you don't want to die, my dear," Hisaya snarled, bringing the axe down again, "I would recommend you reboot. Let this failure of a life end and give someone worthy a chance." She grew thorns out from her constricted tail, intended to wind their way through the tree foot on top of it, but Hisaya had hardened and bolstered it to such a degree that it was more like stone, and her thorns shattered where they made impact. Crazed eyes wormed their way out of Hisaya's empty sockets, and when Marie looked in the split seconds available, she could see that tears were still streaming down them. "We were meant to be together!" he roared in anguish. The axe came down. Smash! "You were meant to be on my side!" Crack! "It was destiny!" Splat! I can't believe he's stealing Serena's bit. This was play fighting. No matter how much either of them bled, or were smashed, or were burnt, or were strangled, or were disemboweled, it was irrelevant. Any lost biomass was nearly instantly scooped up again, and both of them had turned their senses of pain off before this fight had even begun. No matter how much of his frustration Hisaya let loose on her, Marie would not die. She'd be reduced to a pile of broken bones and torn apart meat, but she would not die. Not unless Titan Hisaya was willing to use his venom. What about cutting her 9x9?
Well, yeah, but that's not like...
Why can't...
In this situation, you're not going to get that sort of situation to fight.
I suppose, yeah. Well, I thought when he webbed her for a second he might have tried that. She had killed the monsters he'd called his children, destroyed his future, shattered his dreams right before his eyes. Among humans, this would be more than sufficient grounds for a crime of passion. But there were more than enough humans to go around. Hisaya dashed her ribs with another swipe before taking a step back, panting with frustration. The skull protruding from his fur was more like a mask than a face, though, and Marie could see the clear white eyes and flat line of a mouth behind it. The bone axe swirled and softened like ice cream, solidifying into a three-fingered hand once again. It hung limp with the other. "Why, Marie?" The rage had drained from Hesiah's voice, and all that was left was exhaustion. "Why? I don't... Why?" Blood dribbled from her half-formed mouth as she breathed through repairing lungs. When she spoke, she knew it was the truth. "Even if I told you," she rasped, "you wouldn't understand." As she quickly glanced towards the door behind Hesiah, she returned to her normal human form, if a little battered and disheveled. Hesiah's face hardened, and his fingers snapped once again into talons. His eyes and mouth vanished into the darkness behind his mask. "You understand, of course," he growled, lifting his claws high above his head, "that now you'll always be alone." Marie closed her eyes. "I'm not alone," she said. The claws came down. White aether crackled. And... "Full throttle!" Atoy Muzazi said. It was a sneak attack, but it was still magnificent. Hesiah's hand and the top of his head were sliced off by Atoy's perfect slash, an injury sufficient to make him stagger backwards. With a screech of fury, the Gene Tyrant swung back around, his free arm morphing into a set of bladed tendrils to slice Atoy in half. He stopped mid-slash. In all of the chaos of battle, Titan Hesiah had not noticed. Of course he hadn't. How could he? He'd spent 1,000 years hiding and skulking in the shadows. Marie Hazard had fought. Titan Hesiah hadn't noticed that the doors were open. Titan Hesiah hadn't noticed Atoy Muzazi sneaking up on him. And Titan Hesiah hadn't noticed the squad of security officers accompanying him, their eyes wide with terror. For the briefest of instants, Titan Hesiah did not move. He simply stared back at the crowd of witnesses. His body did not so much as twitch. His face held no expression. Didn't Marie just out herself too?
No, it specifically mentions that he changes back to a human form.
Oh, but the horror he himself must have been experiencing was obvious. He had been discovered, after all. "Open fire!" one of the officers screamed, and as one, the panicked crowd fired a hail of plasma fire at the hulking beast. It filled the air like a glowing orange waterfall. With a roar of fury and a swipe of an arm warped into a bone shield, Hesiah swept the incoming onslaught away. 12 armored tentacles, one for each officer, sprouted from his back and lashed towards the security officers, no doubt intending to decapitate them to a man. But Atoy Muzazi... Oh, right, to each man. Okay, sorry. But Atoy Muzazi was there. He leapt between the tentacles and the officers, the shining blade in his hands dancing beyond human limits. He deflected the tentacles each time they struck, sparks exploding with each repelled blow. Thrusters like those of a rocket flickered across his body with each movement, tiny cuts opening over his body as it was pushed beyond biology. Oh my god, beyond Gene Tyrants even! The tentacles came instead for Atoy as their primary target, striking again and again each time they were repelled. As his speed increased, the sound of clashing bone and steel overpowering the space, Atoy let out a guttural scream of determination. 10 seconds. Atoy Muzazi was one of the finest warriors Marie had ever known, but even so he was only capable of holding off that onslaught for 10 seconds. His stance was solid, but the force was overwhelming, and he was hopelessly outnumbered. For each 6 tentacles he deflected perfectly, the next 6 would be a second off, knocking Atoy off balance and making the next 6 even worse. Deep gashes and wounds were opening over Atoy's body as he repelled the blows. His white aether flickered and faded as he moved with all the speed he was able. His arms shook as stray droplets of plasma landed on his arms, the product of the security team's continued fire. And the determination in his eyes remained untarnished as he fended off a god. 10 seconds. That was all they needed. As Hesiah turned away, concentrating fully on the attack of the humans, Marie rose to her feet. Her legs were shaky, unsteady like those of a baby deer, but she couldn't, I assume, exactly let Atoy show her
Devil
up, could
ends.
she? She had a job to do here after columnant. She had a job to do here, too. She charged, maintaining her human form even as she tackled Hesiah from behind, arms looping around his titan of a waist. A second face sprouted on Hesiah's back, staring her right in the face, but she paid no mind. Instead, making sure it was unseen by the officers, she grew a long, thin horn from her forehead and gored it right there and then. And then she pushed, exercising all the strength this body was capable of producing. Hesiah could not focus on her, because that would mean lessening the load on Atoy. He couldn't focus on Atoy, because that would mean ignoring Marie. Because he was trying to focus on both of them, he hadn't realized where Marie was actually pushing him. It had taken some sleight of hand, or really her entire body, but she'd managed to get that vat open. Like she'd said, those vats were capable of many things. Gestating, terminating, and freezing. With a burst of animal strength, Marie focused Hesiah fully into the vat, his back thumping against the glass, and as his barely visible eyes widened, she knew he'd rumbled her. Wait, what?
I just figured it out.
Would it be he knew she'd rumbled her?
No.
She knew he'd... I'm so confused. Sorry. I'm not familiar with that phrase. She knew he'd rumbled her. But too late. As she leapt back, the glass door of the vat snapped shut. That didn't mean Hesiah was harmless. Far from it. He smashed his bulk against the glass once, twice, each time cracks splintering across its surface. It wouldn't survive much more. Marie rolled around and looked to a toy to signal him, but there was no need. He was already on his way. His thrusters had sent him across the room, over to one of the surviving consoles, one she'd pointed out to him during their preparations, and like a lance from heaven, his finger tapped the waiting command. Cryogenic sequence in progress, a cool female voice resounded throughout the room. Please wait patiently. Hesiah hesitated for just a moment, and that was what truly defeated him. White smoke scoured the inside of the vat, cooling him down to his utmost, but he did not scream or rage or cry. Instead, with unsettling calm, he placed the palm of his hand against the frosting glass and stared Marie down with murderously serene eyes. When he spoke, she couldn't hear him through the glass, but reading his mouth was just as good. For this, you pay forever, he said, even as his eyeballs froze and his body moved no more. For this, unto you. Then he was a statue, and moved no more. I would get rid of the move no more, because you already said it once. Yeah, from that first one. There you go. That Marie let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding in for hours. Vaguely, she reached up to touch her forehead. She had gotten rid of the horn, hadn't she? She hadn't messed up at the last minute? Her hand felt only smooth skin. They'd done it. Marie, a toy grunted, and as she turned to look at him, he collapsed onto one knee. Hesiah had really done a number on him. Blood oozed from half a dozen wounds, some of them serious, and the only thing that stopped him from collapsing fully was the fact that he'd stabbed his sword into the floor as a support. I don't like that they have not smashed the ice statue yet, because this makes me think he's going to thaw out in the future. Someone smash him into less than 9x9 pieces now, okay? Even so, there was the slightest smirk on his face. They'd accomplished a great feat, after all. Marie managed to get over to him and bowled him up before he fell over. His sword slipped... I assume hold him up, yeah. Her sword slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. I was actually unsure if that was like another phrase I hadn't heard before. Like rumbled.
Well,
no.
Before, yeah.
A toy mumbled in the moment before he too slipped unconscious. Lou. Marie carefully lowered to the ground, one of her hands supporting his neck, before looking up at the frazzled guards. Medical supplies, she snapped sternly. Bandages, stimulants, whatever you can get. Not panacea. That last bit probably didn't need saying, but she'd learnt long ago never to underestimate human stupidity. A couple of the guards ran off to execute her commands, but one, a younger-looking man, stepped forward. His gaze was still focused on the monster locked in ice. What? He whispered. What the hell is that? Marie took a deep breath. Can I popcorn it to you? I'm,
sure.
Out of steam.
Gene tyrant, she addressed the gathered refugees. Titan Hesiah was a gene tyrant. After getting a toy into the infirmary and making sure the doctor understood she wouldn't accept failure, Marie had decided to waste no time. She descended the building with the remaining guards and brought together civilians in the warehouse. Once she'd explained to the tortoise behind the scenes that Titan Hesiah had been deposed, he was only too happy to cooperate. She stood with her hands clasped stoically behind her back, framed on either side by security officers. It wasn't like she needed them here exactly, but they helped project a sense of authority. Someone near the front of the crowd, a burly-looking miner with tattooed arms, scoffed. A gene tyrant! He raised his eyebrows. What? And I suppose the Supreme was there with him too? What's your angle, lady? No angle, Marie explained, keeping her voice as steady and calm as possible. Currently we believe that the real Titan Hesiah was murdered and replaced by this gene tyrant at some point over the last few years. Since then he's been acting to advance his own interests, specifically with an aim of mustering a force to re-establish the civilization of the gene tyrants. That plot has now been foiled. Someone in the crowd laughed. Marine ignored it. However, she went on, the danger is not yet past. The repurposed outside is still active, will still attack on sight, and are likely preparing the next move even now. I've instructed company engineers to scour the communications network for whatever sabotage the tyrant used to stop the government of the galaxy from knowing what was happening here. If any of you have experience with this field, we'd be happy to have you. A quiet murmuring overtook the crowd. The possibility of rescue had now been raised. No matter how insane the rest of what she said was, that alone would hopefully win her some points. She took a deep breath. It's paramount that you listen to and work together with us on this, she said. Repairing communications will take time, and the repurpose will act sooner rather than later. We're in this together. If we... Together? Someone in the midst of the crowd snarled. Like hell, you all ran up to the top and left us to the wolves. There's a wave of agreement, angry cheers from rightfully angry men and women. The discontent spread across the faces of person to person. Fat chance we're gonna listen to you cowards now! Who put you in charge? Who the fuck are you anyway? There are no more Gene
I
Tyrants.
am Zanzinik. Sorry.
There are no more Gene Tyrants. They died 1,000 years ago. That one got an especially good reception, the crowd erupting into jeers and shouting. Marie breathed in deep through her nose and out through her mouth. There was a good deal of genuine rage around the crowd, of genuine doubt, but what was also there, creeping along the edges, was a cold and uncertain fear. What if she was right? They would do anything they could to deny that, would shout and cry for as long as it took, but I believe her.
How much do you want to bet that's someone from the main crew?
Let's find out. A clear voice cut through the babble of the crowd, so resonant that the vocal cords behind it must have been infused with aether. The arguing hushed and curious glances turned towards a person in the middle of the crowd. Someone in the way shifted and Marie got a good look at the speaker. I believe her, Dragon Hadrian said again, stepping forward, brushing his silver hair out of his face.
There he is!
I've seen him too, the golden boy.
I was gonna say, because the main crew all knew they existed, so it makes sense they'd believe her.
Marie raised an eyebrow. Marie raised an eyebrow. It seemed she wasn't the only one who could come back from the dead.
Alright, so I can finally, the funny thought I've had since the beginning that I
Yeah.
held back for time and to preserve the seriousness. You mentioned she could, like, absorb biomass to her skin by changing. I was imagining, like, Muzazi rolling her around like a Katamari Damacy ball. She's just getting bigger. I want that drawn at some point. I might have to commission that.
Marie
from
turns
someone
into a
when I have
titan like, I was born into this world a toy.
Oh, man. But I'm very upset because you very deliberately did not write a scene where he was smashed to pieces. So clearly he's going to thaw out and come back. I don't know why you did that. They know it has to be 9x9. So why, Tanhony? Why? Why? Marie knows. Was it supposed to be a mercy thing, like I'll let you out when you learn to be a good boy? Because clearly his threat will now come true. Guys, don't you just hate it when writer bros do this to you? I can't believe it. They literally had no reason to not do it, and yet he perseveres. Anyway, Tanhony, give us our fact.
Our fact?
Yes.
Our fact.
Tell us about I'll give you one you've already done, so it's easier for you. Tell us about popular video games in Aetheral space.
Absolutely. So I mentioned this in the Discord. There was once a game called Supreme Wars, in which it's like a MOBA against the like historical quote unquote MOBA between the force of the Black Supreme and the Red Supreme. In truth, though, these two Supremes existed at different periods in history, and there was no such thing as the Supreme Wars.
Nice. I have a question.
Yeah.
Ignore that I'm eating a snack. Do they play it straight? Like, do they pretend this was a history thing and it's been so long people
It's like
buy it?
Dynasty
Or are they like
Warriors or
it's
something.
or is it like historic? Okay, so they treat it like historical fiction and they know it is such.
Well, no, like Dynasty Warriors is super over the top, basically.
Right. Okay, so they do try to play it like this happened.
Not really. It's like
I see.
super over the top. Like they know it didn't really happen.
Like, okay, so people are aware it's like fictional in
Yeah.
the video game. It's not like propaganda. Very interesting.
In fact,
All right.
some conservative groups in supremacy disapprove of it because it disrespects history.
Interesting. That sounds about right. Tanhony, give us a boring group of interest from the supremacy. Second fact. Tell us about this group that disapproves of it, these stodgy supremacy people.
Well, they've been mentioned before. The Tree of Might, they're called. Well, maybe we'll find out more about them later.
Oh, yeah, they were like the hard... Because, like, the whole thing in supremacy you mentioned is, like, strength is like, power, but everyone has a different view of what strength is.
They're really
like, for example,
traditionalists.
Muzazi... Yeah, so theirs is literal, like, fighting power is power.
Their Muzazi,
Whereas I know-
their ass is much bigger.
Yeah, like, I know Muzazi's, like, there's strength of kindness and stuff, too, and I know with Samael it was like, money is strength, but these guys would be like, no, strength is
It's
strength.
discipline and strength,
Grr.
yeah.
Yeah. Alright. Well, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.